Well, back at it again with the face cam, you're probably thinking to yourself. And this is for a good reason, because, well, since it's October, and it is the definitive spooky month, I feel like it is only natural for me to talk about something that I, well, briefly mentioned in a video, I think probably at this point, about a week ago or so. And, well, I stated at the beginning of that video that I do in fact enjoy a little bit of analog horror here and there. And trust me, I love analog horror to absolute fucking pieces. Like, it is absolutely fantastic. It is a very creative, method of, horror that is, honestly, if executed very well, is, some of the best horror experience that you could possibly, see, especially on, places like YouTube and whatnot. And of course, there's quite a few of them to try and pick through. However, I've only really watched a handful of them, and it's mainly some of the more well-known ones for obvious reasons. And, well, I feel like at least putting a few of those onto a tier list is probably a very perfectly safe idea and won't cause any kind of controversy at all. Now, of course, I'm gonna handle this a little bit differently. I'm gonna handle it almost like a DeZombs video, where instead of going through the list in order of, the Analogue Horror series that I actually have, in order of how the fucking website has decided to put it, instead I'm just gonna be going up through the tier list and putting things where they kind of go through. So of course the list goes from F to S, you get the point, and I have 8 analog horror series, and all 8 of these are analog horror series that are pretty decently well known. So, without further ado, let us sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and let's get into sorting analog horror here. So of course here in F, there's only going to be one series within the F ranking, and I think we can all take a wild fucking guess as to which one it is. That's right, it's everybody's favorite shock horror content, Urban Spook, which surprisingly enough, as of recording this video, has recently come out with a new episode in which they finally decide to reveal the killer, and the killer literally looks like a fucking soy check. Seriously, all this build-up and you give us this. Wow! What a load of shit that was. Now, of course, I quite literally had to have someone who is clinically insane enough to have actually unironically watched this series to actually explain to me what the fuck the story is actually supposed to be. So apparently within Urban Spook, it mainly follows, I guess, this detective or whoever that's trying to figure out who this mass murderer really is. However, there's really no explanation as to why the videos are formatted in the way that they are, or why the killer decides to do all this brutal stuff, or even why, if it is the detective that's making these tapes, why the detective decided to include the shocking content rather than just, leave it out as it's completely fucking unnecessary. It's honestly just all over the place, in my personal opinion. And here's the thing. Here's the one kicker that kind of makes Urban Spook just unbelievably infuriating to me. And that is, the concept of the killer and the story isn't that bad. If it were handled properly, the series could have actually been fucking passable at the very least. It could have actually been good if it were handled well and had a lot more effort put into it. If it just decided to leave out the senseless shock content, I just smacked my nose. If it decided to just leave out the senseless shock content, honestly, the series would have been a fucking banger if it were handled properly, and it could have actually been a very solid story. However, unfortunately, we have some edgy fucking 15-year-old that decided to create this story, and, well, we have Urban Spook today, which for some reason, there's people unironically trying to defend this thing as if it's the second coming of Jesus Christ. I genuinely cannot understand why this series is popular, because it's just... first of all, it's not even really analog horror. I mean, it's analog horror in the sense that it basically follows the fucking format of, really, really low-effort analog horror. And if the purpose for it was to, I guess, mock, the low-effort analog horror, if it were all done ironically, then I could at least get somewhat behind it, and I could at least excuse some of the senseless shock content, but the simple fact that the fucking creator is willing to defend even his own work and isn't actually stating that it's all just kind of meant to be a fucking meme, it just kind of makes it completely indefensible. So of course, Urban Spook is going right into the F ranking. I wouldn't recommend watching this series unless you genuinely feel like losing your lunch, so you know, if you really, really want to try and go on a diet that involves you vomiting every 5 minutes, go ahead and watch some Urban Spook, as that'll definitely fucking help you. If you need some help sleeping, Urban Spook is right there for you, because it'll put you right to fucking sleep with just how fucking terribly formatted it is. It is just not a good series in any fucking stretch of the definition, and that's really all I have to say. So next up, we have the C ranking here, which is pretty much kind of almost like a middle of the road tier, if I'm going to be completely honest when it comes to this. That's just how it's going to go, even though that's not how it looks. Fuck you, this is my list, and I decide the rules. The first thing that I'm putting within the C ranking here is going to be, well, Blue Channel. It is a, as of right now, 1-episode series created by Gooseworks that is a very interesting idea. Like, the Blue Channel thing, the only episode of it is kind of like an advertisement for some sort of, like, medicine that is supposed to expand the range of emotions for a human being, and it proceeds to get more and more absurd as it tries to list even more different emotions that seem completely fucking inhuman. It is a very interesting idea, don't get me wrong, however, it is just kind of goofy at the end of the day. Like, I guarantee you it was kind of more or less just kind of made as a way to just kind of like, I guess, play off of like some of the analog horror stuff that was going on during that time. And it is pretty effective as an analog horror piece, don't get me wrong. However, first, it's only like 1 actual episode, and second of all, it is just kind of goofy. Like, don't get me wrong. Now, of course, if it continues to be expanded on at some point in the future, then honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But, like, as of right now, it's just kind of like a little bit of, like, a really goofy episode for something that still has a little bit of effectiveness as an analog horror piece. So, of course, it's going right into the C ranking. Wow, so far only 2 rankings have 1 each within their, respective places. But that's probably going to change with the next one. The first up within the B ranking here is going to be none other than Local 58. Local 58 is pretty much, I think, like, universally considered to be, like, the first, like, well-known analog horror series on YouTube. It is a fairly short series, so it's, you know, it's not exactly a very long series unlike some of the other series that are going to be on this list. It's a relatively short series, and it has a very simple premise to it. It's basically kind of like a local TV network called, well, wouldn't you fucking know, it's called Local 58, and it kind of mainly follows this idea of something of, like, the, like, wavelength for the Local 58 broadcasts is, like, the same wavelength that kind of interferes with broadcasts that are supposedly being used by some entity on the moon. And whatever the fuck is on the moon is not very happy with that. So, of course, using the advantage of the Local 58 broadcast being the same wavelength, whatever is on the moon decides to try and interfere with it in order to basically fuck with people. Basically letting them know that they shouldn't be doing this and that they should just stop because it's kind of pissing them off. And when a simple warning doesn't do enough, then it starts to get a little bit more sinister. First, it kind of starts off with kind of managing to get access to a broadcast that was initially planned for, like, in the event of, like, losing the Cold War, in which the final instruction is to quite literally just shoot yourself in the fucking head. And when that didn't work, and the broadcast ended up regaining control and kind of clearing things up and saying it was a fucking misinput, well, the aliens started to get a little bit more creative by creating their very own, like, listing for something called real sleep, in order to try and cause, like, facial dissociation, in order to kind of cause, like, you know, people to just kind of, like, lose the idea of facial recognition whatsoever and cause people to just start killing each other.
There are no faces. There are no faces. There are no faces.
And when that didn't work, well, whatever was on the moon started to take things into its own hands by kind of directly interfering with things. I'm assuming, like, the moon itself started to become hostile at some point, which is why there was a broadcast kind of, like, stating that no one should go outside under any circumstances and look at the moon. Meanwhile, whatever's on the moon is trying to change it up and say, hey, go outside, it's perfectly fine. It's almost kind of like a reverse, like, you know, when day breaks, except this time it's the moon that's causing shit, and we aren't really sure what the moon is actually doing. Now, of course, as of a year ago, there was a newer upload for Local 58, and, well, that's so far the most recent upload on Local 58. So, it's very obvious that Local 58 is probably going to continue expanding on it, although I have no idea if, well, the most recent upload is actually going to be their definitive last one. No one is really sure, but we have a simple idea and a basic premise, and it's honestly a pretty solid pick in terms of analog horror, which is why I'm putting it right into the B tier. And then the next one up on the B tier, we have Needle Mouse. Needle Mouse is a very interesting one, mainly because it's kind of a reimagining of an old creepypasta. If any of you guys have been around on the internet long enough to know what Sonic.exe is, then you'll already know where I'm kind of going with this, as well as where this series is kind of going with this. Now, of course, Sonic.exe itself was a pretty shit creepypasta if you decide to look back on it with your brain functioning. And, of course, the creator of Sonic.exe, like, the original creepypasta, is just not a good person whatsoever in, like, every single sense of the fucking word. However, Needle Mouse kind of, like, takes the original idea of Sonic.exe and actually makes it into something very good. Like, the overall series itself kind of initially starts off as just, like, regular gameplay that's being interfered with by some sort of, like, spirit possessing the cartridge in some kind of way, shape, or form. And as the series continues going along, we are kind of revealed, it's kind of revealed what in the world is going on and why there are these different spirits that are, like, infesting this cartridge. There's also, like, a second, like, you know, season that involves, like, two, like, main characters kind of like trying to make some sort of like gaming series, which kind of ends up getting, you know, overthrown by the fact that, well, they decide to pick up a fucking haunted cartridge. It's honestly a pretty interesting take on Sonic.exe, and it is infinitely better than the original story, don't get me wrong. The artwork, the art style of the series is actually pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's very simplistic, but it's a type of simplicity that actually makes it work. Like, I don't know how to properly describe it. It's just, I just like it. That's really all I have to say. Like, it's just a generally very solid series. Like, I just personally enjoy it. That's really all I have to say. I'm mainly putting it into the B tier, not because it's, like, mid or, like, bad or anything like that. It's a very solid series. It's just, I don't know. Something tells me that it just doesn't quite belong in the upper tiers. Please don't attack me for this. And now we get into the A tier. This is where things get real. And the first thing that's going into the A tier is going to be, well, none other than Kane Pixel's Backrooms Found Footage series. This series is actually pretty good. Now, for, like, the two of you who have no fucking clue what the Backrooms is, it started off with, like, I think, like, a 4chan post or something like that, talking about how there are certain parts of the world where you can no-clip through, but attempting to do so will cause you to kind of, like, enter this parallel world known as the Backrooms, which is just kind of like this infinite, like, ever-changing labyrinthian hallway system where you pretty much already have the idea that you're definitely not alone there, but there's just no hope of actually escaping. Now, Kane Pixels kind of takes that original idea and builds upon it into, like, a completely new series with, like, an organization that ends up discovering it and figures out a way to, like, purposefully send people in and out of the Backrooms, as well as, like, discovering new sections of the Backrooms that are even, like, crazier than, like, the initial first level. It is honestly a very solid series. It kind of has, like, this mix of, like, CG animation, which is very fucking good, intermixed with, like, you know, like, actual, like, footage, like, actual live recording and whatnot. Like, it is a good series, and I highly recommend it. Like, it's very hard to explain. You just have to watch the series for yourself. I recommend it. It's a very good spin on the original Backrooms idea, to the point where it is just, chef's kiss. I love it. Next up, on the A tier, we have ourselves Vita Carnus. Vita Carnus is once again another very interesting series. It's one of the newer analog horror series that exists, and I highly recommend that you go ahead and check it out. It's kind of it's kind of weird. Like, the entire premise mainly revolves around, like, this otherworldly kind of, like, thing simply known as, well, the Vita Carnus. It's like this living meat, like, substance that just spontaneously appeared on the planet one day, And, well, the kind of like first season of it is more or less like a documentary going over like the different aspects of this like unknown substance. Starting off with like the crawl, which is like the baseline of all of it, and then going into the trimmings, which are like these kind of like small like beetle looking things. And then it kind of like progressively gets more and more absurd with like more and more like threatening things. All the way leading up to whatever the fuck the singularity is. What is this thing?
The singularity is an orb comprised of a dark-colored mineral with hints of luminous colors within its core. The singularity.
What the fuck? And what honestly kind of makes this series kind of like freaky, even freakier, is that like it's pretty much implied that there is some sort of organization that is attempting to normalize the existence of this unknown, like, living thing that seems to also be implied to have, like, this line of communication between each of the different parts, each of the different creatures that make up all of the Vita Carnus. Like, it is a very... It is weird. It is a very strange series, but it's a very good one. I recommend that you watch both of the seasons of it. It's pretty solid. That's all I have to say. And then finally up on the A tier, we have ourselves Monument Mythos. This series is a very good one, I'm not gonna lie. It is once again one of the few, like, I believe completed analog horror series that exists, and I cannot recommend it enough. It is a very lengthy one, don't get me wrong, but it involves so much lore within it. Like, it involves like different like parallel universes and shit like that, and it's done surprisingly well. Like, normally the entire rule is you don't fuck with time and different universes and shit like that unless you know what the hell you're doing, but personally, it does this very fucking well. And honestly, I really cannot recommend it enough. It's honestly one of those series where it was very difficult to try and decide whether or not it should really go into A or S tier. Like, it was very difficult to decide, and even still, like, I am not even sure about my final decision on this one. Like, it is a very good series, and it's one of those kinds of series that I just really cannot say too much about it without spoiling too much of it. Just go watch it for yourself, that's all I have to say. And now we get into the S tier, and we only have like 2 series that are left. The first thing that's going into the S tier is, of course, going to be Gemini Home Entertainment. Gemini Home Entertainment is a very good series in my personal opinion. Like, it was, I think, surprisingly enough, it was actually the first analog horror series that I actually decided to sit down and, like, seriously watch for myself. Like, obviously, I sat down and watched Local 58 when people were talking about, it back in those days, but, like, with, like, the newer analog horror stuff, like, Gemini Home Entertainment was, like, the first one that I decided to sit down and watch, like, just, like, on my own. And then I moved into, like, some of the other ones, surprisingly enough. And it's kind of a similar thing to, like, Vita Carnus, except this time it's kind of like this otherworldly body snatcher kind of thing that comes from, like, some sort of unknown moon of Neptune or something along those lines. It is, once again, a very, like, almost enigmatic kind of series that is still kind of being worked on to this day. Like, as of, I think, like, 3 months ago, there was, like, a new, installment for the Gemini Home Entertainment series. So, once again, I highly recommend that you go ahead and watch the series for yourself, as it is freaky, it is bizarre, and it is just perfect in so many different ways. Like, it has gone the extra mile to the point where, like, within one of the advertisements on, like the first, like, episodes of Gemini Home Entertainment, they even went out of their way to quite literally create the game that was advertised in one of the videos for people to play on their own, and it has multiple endings. I might even make an entire video where I decide to play it on my own and see how many of the endings I can actually get. If that game is even still, like, available. I hope it is, because I really want to fucking play it for myself. Like, it looks like a little bit of, like, a fun thing to play, especially for, like, spooky month. But, yeah, putting that into the S rank, you already know. And now, finally, I think we all saw this one coming. Way up there at the top of S tier, Mandela catalog. Of course, it has to be pretty much what is now considered to be the OG of analog horror. Mandela catalog is an entire series created by Alex Kister, and it is a fantastic fucking series. Like, personally, like, it is still, like, going on to this day, and I really do not want to spoil too much of this series for anyone that wants to watch. Like, it is just genuinely that fucking good. That's really all I have to say. So, honestly, I'm not going to spoil too much of it. It is a fucking solid series. It is absolutely fantastic. Alex himself is also a very, like, he even communicates with people like Wendigoon and whatnot, which is also pretty cool. Like, personally, like, just the entire series, as well as the creator itself, is just... I love it. You just have to watch it on your own. That's really all I have to say. I mean, it is a fairly long series now, but it's worth your time. That's all I have to say, and I do not want to spoil too much of it. And there we have it. The definitive analog horror tier list. Now, I'm pretty sure there's probably a handful of different analog horror series that I probably forgot about, and personally, I wouldn't be surprised. But this is just my own personal opinion on, like, a lot of the different analog horror series that currently exist now. Obviously, if you don't agree with it, whatever, at the end of the day, it's all just currently just kind of subjective. Except for Urban Spook. Urban Spook is objectively fucking terrible. But anyways, guys, if you guys enjoyed today's video, please consider leaving a like. That's very well appreciated. Leave a comment down below what you thought about the video, what you want me to talk about next, and also subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want to see more content such as this. Also, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I don't have much else to say right there. And yeah, anyways, guys, this has been Sanity. And have yourselves a nice day.